The most dangerous mistakes are never made by people who ignore the law. They are made by those who believe they already know the truth before the facts arrive. Washington, D.C. had a way of making power look ordinary. Black SUVs rolled through the city every hour. Government buildings blended into one another behind rows of flags and polished stone. Men and women wearing business suits hurried past monuments that had witnessed generations of history, while tourists pointed cameras toward marble domes without noticing the countless decisions shaping the country behind those walls. On a bright Monday morning, traffic moved steadily along Constitution Avenue. Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against his patrol cruiser, sipping the last of his coffee while watching the morning commute. After 17 years on the force, he believed experience had taught him something no academy ever could. People always revealed themselves before they spoke. At least, that was what he believed. His radio crackled with routine updates until another voice interrupted. Unit 12, we've received a complaint regarding an unauthorized vehicle parked in the restricted loading zone outside the Federal Records Annex. Ethan glanced across the street. There it was, a black Chevrolet Suburban. Large, clean, perfectly maintained. Its windows were darkly tinted, and no one appeared to be inside. From where Ethan stood, it looked expensive enough to belong to someone important, or someone pretending to be. He crossed the street, his boots clicking sharply against the pavement. The SUV sat beside a curb marked with clear government restrictions. Delivery vehicles were permitted for limited periods. Official government vehicles had designated authorization. Ethan studied the license plate. It wasn't immediately familiar. He circled the SUV once. No parking permit was displayed where he expected to see one. No visible credentials rested on the dashboard. He folded his arms. Another person who thinks the rules don't apply. A security guard standing near the building approached. They've been there about 15 minutes. You know whose vehicle it is? Ethan asked. The guard shrugged. Never saw. The driver? Ethan nodded. That makes this easy. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, send a tow service to my location. The security guard looked surprised. Without waiting? If they're authorized, they'll have paperwork. He glanced back at the SUV. If they aren't, his sentence faded into a confident smile. They can explain it after it's impounded. Across the sidewalk, pedestrians continued moving through the morning without paying much attention. One woman slowed just long enough to watch. A courier pushing a handcart paused briefly before continuing down the block. No one imagined the parked SUV would become the center of the morning. Dispatch responded. Tow service notified. Estimated arrival, 8 minutes. Ethan acknowledged the transmission and began filling out the preliminary towing paperwork. Everything felt routine. Predictable. Another vehicle. Another violation. Another lesson for someone who thought regulations were optional. He barely noticed the man walking toward him from across the plaza. Marcus Reed carried a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm. His charcoal gray suit fit neatly without drawing attention, and his polished shoes reflected the morning sunlight with every measured step. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't looking around nervously. He simply walked with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew where he belonged. When Marcus noticed Ethan standing beside the SUV, he changed direction and approached calmly. Good morning, officer. Ethan looked up. Morning. Marcus glanced toward the Suburban. Is there a problem? Ethan tapped the clipboard against the hood of his patrol car. Is this your vehicle? Yes. Ethan studied him for a long moment. His eyes drifted from Marcus's tailored suit to the SUV and back again. Something about the combination didn't fit the story he had already begun writing in his mind. This vehicle is parked in a restricted federal loading zone. Marcus nodded politely. I understand. And yet you parked here anyway. I did. There wasn't the slightest trace of anxiety in Marcus's voice. No excuses. No hurried explanations. Only calm certainty. Ethan frowned. The tow truck is already on its way. Marcus looked once toward the Suburban before meeting the officer's eyes again. He neither argued nor protested. Instead, he spoke in the same composed tone. Officer. He paused just long enough for Ethan to expect an excuse. You may want to reconsider. For the first time that morning, the routine traffic stop no longer felt routine. It felt like the opening move in a game only one of them understood. Marcus Reed's words lingered in the morning air long after he finished speaking. You may want to reconsider. There was no challenge in his voice. No anger. No arrogance. Only quiet certainty. Officer Ethan Brooks let out a short laugh, the kind reserved for people he believed were bluffing. I've heard that line before. Marcus remained still. I'm sure you have. Ethan clipped the towing form onto his clipboard. Then you already know how this works. I do. Good. Ethan pointed toward the black Suburban. Then you'll understand why it's being removed. Marcus glanced at the SUV before looking back at the officer. I understand your concern. But I don't believe you have all the information. Ethan folded his arms. Then this is your opportunity. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket with slow, deliberate movements. Every gesture seemed designed to avoid unnecessary tension. He handed Ethan a government-issued driver's license. No sudden movements, Ethan said automatically. Marcus simply nodded. The license identified him as Marcus Reed. The address matched a neighborhood in Northern Virginia. Everything appeared ordinary. Ethan looked up. Registration. Marcus unlocked the driver's door and retrieved a document holder from the center console. He handed over the registration without hesitation. Ethan examined every line. Vehicle identification number. Registration date. Insurance. Everything matched. Nothing appeared forged. Nothing appeared suspicious. Dispatch answered before Ethan could request verification. Unit 12, registration check complete. Go ahead. The vehicle is properly registered. Ethan frowned. Registered to Marcus Reed? A brief pause followed. Affirmative. His eyes narrowed. That wasn't the answer he expected. He compared the registration with Marcus's license again. Every detail aligned perfectly, yet something inside him resisted accepting what the paperwork clearly showed. His instincts whispered that something was wrong. Experience, he believed, had taught him not to ignore that feeling. Marcus watched quietly. The documents answer your questions. Ethan looked up. They answer some of them. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Which ones remain? Ethan gestured toward the SUV. People don't usually park expensive vehicles in restricted federal zones unless they think they can get away with it. Marcus answered without hesitation. Or unless they have permission. Ethan ignored the comment. Where do you work? Marcus smiled politely. I'm here on official business. What kind of business? Federal business. The answer only deepened Ethan's suspicion. Everyone claims that. Marcus never raised his voice. I imagine some people do. The officer stepped closer. What agency? Marcus met his eyes. I don't believe that's relevant to whether you can lawfully tow my vehicle. For a moment, neither man spoke. The city moved around them. Traffic lights changed. Tourists crossed intersections. A bus sighed to a stop before pulling away again. Only the growing silence between the two men seemed louder than everything else. Dispatch interrupted once more. Unit 12, additional confirmation. Registration valid. Insurance active. No reports associated with the vehicle. Every official record pointed toward the same conclusion. The SUV belonged exactly where the paperwork said it belonged. Marcus noticed Ethan reading the updated information. So, Ethan slowly lowered the radio. So paperwork doesn't always tell the whole story. Marcus gave a small nod. No, it doesn't. It simply gives us a place to begin. Before Ethan could respond, the distant rumble of a diesel engine echoed through the street. Both men turned toward the sound. A heavy-duty tow truck rolled around the corner, its amber warning lights flashing beneath the bright Washington sky. The driver eased toward the curb, completely unaware that the next decision he made would involve far more than an illegally parked SUV. The tow truck eased toward the curb with a low mechanical growl, its amber lights flashing against the polished windows of the federal building. The driver slowed as he approached the black Suburban. He rolled down his window. You the officer who called? Ethan Brooks nodded. That's right. The driver glanced at the SUV, then at Marcus Reed standing calmly a few feet away. Parking violation? Restricted federal loading zone. The driver reached for his clipboard but hesitated for a brief moment. Owner present? Yes. He looked toward Marcus. You planning to move it? Marcus answered before Ethan could. I won't interfere with anyone doing their job. The driver gave a polite nod. I appreciate that. Then Marcus added quietly. I only ask that you verify everything before touching the vehicle. The sentence caught the driver's attention. He climbed out of the truck and walked around the Suburban. Years in the towing business had taught him something Ethan had forgotten. Machines never lied. Paperwork rarely did. People sometimes did. He crouched slightly to inspect the license plate. His eyes lingered longer than expected. Ethan noticed. Problem. I'm just checking. The driver stood again and studied the windshield. No visible agency decal. No. Ethan replied confidently. Which is why we're towing it. Marcus remained perfectly composed. The absence of a visible decal doesn't determine ownership. Ethan looked at him. Neither does claiming it's federal. Marcus didn't answer. He simply watched. The driver walked toward Ethan. You mind if I see the tow authorization? Ethan handed over the form. Everything appeared complete. Violation. Location. Officer identification. Signature. Legally sufficient. The driver handed it back. Looks fine. Yet he didn't move toward his truck. Instead, he looked at Marcus again. Sir. Marcus met his eyes. Yes. One last chance before I hook it up. Marcus smiled faintly. I appreciate your professionalism. Then he spoke carefully. You should know that once your equipment touches this SUV, today's paperwork may become much more complicated than either of us expects. The driver frowned. That wasn't the kind of warning people usually made. There was no threat, no raised voice, no dramatic gesture, only complete confidence. Ethan stepped forward. He's trying to intimidate you. Marcus calmly shook his head. No, I'm trying to prevent unnecessary consequences. The silence that followed seemed to settle over the sidewalk. Even passing pedestrians slowed their pace. A woman carrying coffee stopped near the corner. Two maintenance workers exchanged curious glances. Something about the conversation felt different now. Not louder, heavier. The tow driver finally exhaled. I've learned to trust paperwork. Marcus nodded. So have I. Ethan pointed toward the Suburban. Then do your job. The driver returned to his truck. Hydraulic controls hissed as the wheel lift lowered toward the pavement. Steel arms slowly extended beneath the rear bumper. Marcus never moved. He didn't step in front of the truck. He didn't argue. He simply stood with his leather portfolio resting against his side, watching every movement with remarkable composure. Ethan interpreted the silence as surrender. In reality, it was patience. The metal lift stopped just inches from the SUV. The driver reached for the control lever. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. Without saying a word, he looked back at the Suburban and suddenly took his hand off the controls. The tow truck driver stared at his vibrating phone for several seconds before answering. Yeah. His expression shifted almost immediately. He glanced at the black Suburban, then at Marcus Reed, then back toward Officer Ethan Brooks. Understood. He ended the call without another word. Ethan frowned. What was that about? The driver slipped the phone into his pocket. Just my dispatcher. And he asked me to double-check the vehicle before making contact. Ethan's patience was beginning to wear thin. You've already checked it. I know. Then hook it up. The driver looked uncertain. I'd like to verify one more thing. Marcus remained silent. His calm never changed. He simply stood beside the sidewalk. Hands relaxed around the leather portfolio, watching events unfold exactly as they chose to unfold. Ethan noticed. You seem awfully confident. Marcus answered softly. Confidence and certainty aren't always the same thing. The officer smirked. Sounds philosophical. No, it's practical. The driver walked slowly toward the rear of the Suburban again. This time he crouched lower. His fingers brushed beneath the bumper before stopping. Something had caught his attention. There was no visible badge. No obvious government seal. Nothing that an ordinary passerby would notice. Yet hidden behind the standard mounting hardware was a small metallic identification plate. The driver leaned closer. His breathing slowed. I've never seen one of those. Ethan stepped forward. What now? The driver stood. I'm not saying anything's wrong, but I've been towing vehicles around Washington for almost 20 years. He looked back at the SUV, and I've learned that some vehicles aren't exactly what they appear to be. Ethan folded his arms. Everything appears to be exactly what it is. Marcus finally spoke. Appearances are rarely the safest place to begin an investigation. The words landed harder than Ethan expected. Not because they were threatening, because they sounded like experience. A small crowd had begun forming naturally along the sidewalk. Nobody had planned to stop. People simply sensed something unusual. A young intern whispered to her coworker. A delivery cyclist remained across the street, pretending to check his phone while watching every second. Even the security guard near the entrance had stopped pretending not to pay attention. The city itself seemed to slow. Ethan reached for his radio. Dispatch. Go ahead, Unit 12. I need any additional information connected to this registration. A brief pause followed. Then came the answer. No additional alerts. No warrants. No stolen vehicle reports. No parking enforcement holds. Everything remained clean. Completely clean. Ethan lowered the radio. You see? Marcus gave a slight nod. I do. And yet you're still asking me to reconsider. Marcus looked toward the Suburban for only a moment. I'm asking you to consider whether every important fact has been entered into your report. The officer narrowed his eyes. I have everything I need. Marcus didn't argue. Instead, he quietly replied, I hope that's true. The tow truck driver returned to his controls once again. He hesitated. His hand hovered over the hydraulic lever. The steel wheel lift remained only inches from the rear tires. One movement. That was all it would take. Then, from somewhere farther down the block, another sound drifted through the morning air. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. The unmistakable hum of several large SUV engines approaching in perfect formation. Marcus didn't even turn around. He already knew who had arrived. Ethan, however, looked toward the intersection with growing curiosity. Around the corner, a convoy of black government SUVs slowly came into view, moving with deliberate precision toward the very vehicle he was about to have towed. The convoy moved with remarkable precision. Four identical black SUVs turned onto the street one after another, maintaining perfect spacing as they approached the federal building. No flashing lights. No sirens. No unnecessary display of authority. Just disciplined coordination. Officer Ethan Brooks watched them slow to a controlled stop less than 50 feet from the parked Suburban. The tow truck driver quietly stepped away from the hydraulic controls. I don't like this, he murmured. Ethan barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on the convoy. The lead SUV came to a smooth stop. Its engine shut off. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the sidewalk. He wasn't wearing a police uniform. He wasn't military. There was no dramatic entrance. Only the calm confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility. Within seconds, 3 more suited individuals exited the remaining vehicles. Their movements were coordinated without appearing rehearsed. No one ran. No one shouted. They simply surveyed the area before beginning to walk toward Marcus Reed. The growing crowd instinctively stepped aside. Conversations faded. Even traffic noise seemed distant. The atmosphere had changed. Ethan took a step forward. Sir, this is an active police matter. The lead man acknowledged him with a courteous nod. We understand. His voice remained respectful. We're simply here to meet someone. Ethan glanced toward Marcus. You know these people? Marcus answered with the same calm expression he had worn all morning. Yes. The officer folded his arms. So they work with you? Marcus replied carefully. We work toward the same mission. The answer only deepened Ethan's suspicion. What mission would that be? Marcus offered no explanation. Instead, he asked a question of his own. Officer Brooks, have you made contact with my vehicle yet? Ethan frowned. Not yet. I'm glad. The simple response unsettled the tow truck driver even more. He quietly approached Ethan. Officer, what? I'd really like to wait another minute. Ethan looked irritated. For what? I don't know. The driver glanced toward the approaching group. But something about this doesn't feel routine. Ethan lowered his voice. Your job is towing vehicles. I know. Then tow it. The driver looked toward Marcus again. Marcus didn't signal, didn't gesture, didn't even make eye contact. He simply waited. That patience carried more weight than any argument could have. The suited individuals continued walking until they were only a few yards away. One of them briefly looked toward the Suburban. Another scanned the surrounding sidewalk before giving an almost invisible nod. Their attention wasn't on Officer Brooks. It wasn't on the crowd. It was on the vehicle. Ethan noticed the subtle exchange. His confidence began to compete with curiosity. Still, he refused to step back. Before anyone goes further, he said firmly, I need to know exactly who you are. The lead man stopped. He smiled politely. A fair question. Before he could answer, another suited official arrived beside Marcus. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. Good morning, Mr. Reed. Marcus shook it. Good morning. The greeting was quiet, professional, respectful, yet it instantly revealed something Ethan had failed to notice all morning. None of these people had come to question Marcus. They had come because of him. And as the lead official slowly reached inside his jacket to retrieve an identification wallet, Officer Brooks realized that whatever credentials were about to be displayed would determine whether this had been an ordinary parking dispute or the biggest mistake of his entire career. The leather identification wallet opened with quiet precision. No dramatic flourish, no raised voices, just a single motion that immediately changed the atmosphere. The lead official held the credentials where Officer Ethan Brooks could clearly read them. His confident expression faded. He read the seal once. Then again, his eyes stopped on the agency name. A Federal Executive Protection Division. Not military. Not local law enforcement. An organization whose operations rarely became public knowledge. The official closed the wallet. "My name is Daniel Hayes." He spoke with calm professionalism. "We're here to escort Mr. Marcus Reed." Ethan cleared his throat. "Escort him where?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss operational details." The officer looked toward Marcus. "So you work for them?" Marcus answered with characteristic restraint. "I work with several federal departments." The wording caught Ethan off guard. "Not for. With." There was a difference. A very important one. Daniel Hayes continued. "Officer, has anyone made physical contact with Mr. Reed's vehicle?" Ethan hesitated. "No." The tow truck driver answered first. "Not yet." Hayes gave a small nod. "Thank you." The driver quietly released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Hayes walked toward the black Suburban. Without producing a key, he briefly examined the windshield before placing his hand near the driver's side mirror. A tiny green light flashed almost invisibly beneath the housing, then disappeared. The surrounding officials relaxed. One of them spoke into a discreet communications device clipped beneath his jacket. "Vehicle integrity confirmed." The words reached Ethan's ears. Vehicle integrity. Not ownership. Not registration. Integrity. This wasn't how ordinary government vehicles were discussed. Marcus noticed Ethan's confusion. Some equipment requires continuous security. Verification. The officer stared at him. "What exactly is inside that SUV?" Marcus smiled faintly. "The answer isn't nearly as important as who it's intended to protect." That sentence settled over the crowd like a heavy curtain. No one spoke. Even curious onlookers sensed they had wandered into something far beyond a parking dispute. Daniel Hayes turned back toward Ethan. "Officer Brooks." "Yes. We appreciate that you were performing your duties." His respectful tone surprised everyone listening. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." Ethan felt the first hint of relief. "So we're done here?" Hayes paused before answering. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether any official action was initiated against this vehicle." The officer glanced toward the clipboard still resting beneath his arm. "The tow order has been completed." Hayes nodded once. "I see." The words carried no emotion, yet they somehow felt heavier than criticism. Marcus finally stepped closer. For the first time that morning, he stood beside his vehicle. Not defensively, not possessively, simply as someone reclaiming what had always belonged under his responsibility. He looked directly at Ethan. "I told you there were facts you hadn't been given." Ethan searched for an answer. None came. The confidence that had guided every decision since sunrise was beginning to dissolve. Daniel Hayes reached into his jacket one final time. This time he removed a sealed federal envelope. He held it toward Officer Brooks. "Before we leave." Ethan accepted it cautiously. "What is this?" Hayes met his eyes. The documentation explaining exactly why this vehicle could never have been lawfully impounded. As Ethan slowly opened the envelope, the first page revealed bold federal authorization markings that instantly made one truth impossible to ignore. Marcus Reed had never been an ordinary citizen caught in the wrong place. He had been the protected official at the center of an active federal mission all along. Officer Ethan Brooks stared at the first page in silence. Across the top, bold federal markings identified the document as an operational authorization. Several sections were partially redacted. Others carried classifications he had never encountered during routine patrol assignments. One sentence, however, remained completely visible. Protected Federal Operational Vehicle. Unauthorized seizure prohibited. Ethan read it twice. His grip tightened around the envelope. Then he looked toward the black Suburban. It hadn't changed. The glossy paint reflected the morning sun exactly as it had an hour earlier. The difference was never the vehicle. The difference had been what he failed to recognize. Daniel Hayes watched him without satisfaction, without anger, simply waiting for him to understand. The registration was valid. Ethan said quietly. Yes. The parking location. Authorized under a temporary federal operational exemption. Ethan blinked. There wasn't any indication. There wasn't supposed to be. Marcus Reed finally stepped forward. The purpose of secure operations is that they aren't obvious. The words carried no accusation, only fact. Ethan lowered the document. I had no way of knowing. Marcus considered that for a moment. No, you didn't. Another pause settled over the sidewalk. But there were opportunities to ask different questions. Those words landed far more heavily than any reprimand. The tow truck driver slowly removed the tow authorization from his clipboard. Without being asked, he folded it neatly. I never made contact with the vehicle. Daniel Hayes gave him an appreciative nod. Your caution prevented a far more complicated situation. The driver managed a nervous smile. I've learned that hesitation sometimes saves everyone paperwork. A few quiet laughs escaped from people standing nearby. Even the tension eased slightly. Only Ethan remained motionless. The crowd that had gathered no longer looked at Marcus with curiosity. Now they watched him with respect. Not because anyone had announced his title. Not because anyone had explained his responsibilities. But because every federal official present treated him with unmistakable professional deference. That respect spoke louder than credentials. Marcus noticed the small audience. He turned toward them with a polite smile. Thank you for your patience. Several people nodded back. No speeches followed. No applause. Only quiet understanding. Daniel Hayes reached toward the Suburban. The driver's door unlocked with a soft electronic click. One of the accompanying officials quickly performed a brief visual inspection before stepping aside. Vehicle secure. Marcus placed his hand on the door handle. Before opening it, he looked once more at Officer Brooks. I believe you intended to enforce the law. Ethan finally met his eyes. I did. Marcus nodded. Then remember something. The law protects people best when it begins with facts instead of assumptions. The sentence hung in the air long after he finished speaking. Ethan couldn't answer. Because he knew it was true. Daniel Hayes gathered the federal team with a simple glance. No commands were necessary. Everyone understood their role. As Marcus entered the Suburban, the remaining officials returned to their vehicles with practiced efficiency. Within moments, the convoy prepared to depart. No celebration. No dramatic victory. Just professionals continuing a mission that had briefly been interrupted. Officer Brooks stood on the sidewalk holding the unopened remainder of the federal packet. Realizing that its final pages likely contained procedures his department would soon have to review. The convoy began moving away. Marcus never looked back. He didn't need to. Sometimes the strongest lesson wasn't delivered by punishment. Sometimes it arrived in complete silence, leaving the person who needed it most alone with the truth they could no longer ignore. The convoy disappeared into the morning traffic with quiet precision. Within seconds, the street looked ordinary again. The flashing amber lights on the tow truck were switched off. Pedestrians resumed their conversations. Cars continued through the intersection. Washington moved forward as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Only Officer Ethan Brooks remained exactly where he was. The thick federal packet still rested in his hands. It suddenly felt much heavier than paper should. The tow truck driver walked over cautiously. You all right, officer? Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the first page. Finally, he folded the document closed. I thought I knew what I was looking at. The driver gave a sympathetic nod. So did I. But I stopped. Ethan looked toward him. Why? The older man shrugged. Experience. I've learned that confidence isn't always the same as certainty. The sentence sounded painfully familiar. Marcus had said almost the same thing earlier. Only now did Ethan understand what it meant. A police supervisor's vehicle slowly pulled alongside the curb. Captain Laura Mitchell stepped out after receiving notification from dispatch about the unusual federal contact. She approached calmly. Officer Brooks. Captain, I've already spoken with the federal liaison. Ethan remained silent. Mitchell looked toward the empty space where the convoy had disappeared. No complaints have been filed. The officer blinked. No complaints. No. She paused. They specifically acknowledged that no physical interference occurred. Relief briefly crossed Ethan's face. Then it vanished. Because avoiding disaster wasn't the same as making the right decision. Captain Mitchell continued. They also noted that Mr. Reed remained cooperative throughout the encounter. Ethan lowered his eyes. He did. Were there any threats? No. Did he refuse identification? No. Did he become aggressive? No. Every answer quietly dismantled the assumptions that had shaped the entire encounter. Mitchell didn't raise her voice. She didn't criticize him publicly. Instead, she asked one final question. When did you first decide he couldn't possibly belong there? The question settled like stone. Not because Ethan lacked an answer, because he knew exactly when it happened. It happened before he verified every fact, before he listened, before he considered another possibility. His conclusion had arrived first. The evidence had been expected to follow. I made an assumption, he admitted quietly. Captain Mitchell nodded. Every officer makes mistakes. She looked directly at him. The important question is whether they learn from them. The tow truck driver respectfully excused himself and climbed back into his truck. Before leaving, he offered Ethan one last nod. Take care, officer. You too. The truck rolled away. Its engine faded into the distance. Captain Mitchell handed Ethan a small department notebook. Write everything down. The report. No. The lesson. Ethan looked at her, confused. The paperwork belongs to the department. She gently tapped the notebook. But this belongs to you. After she returned to her vehicle, Ethan remained standing alone on the sidewalk. He opened the notebook. The first blank page waited silently. After several moments, he wrote only one sentence. Verify the person before believing the assumption. He stared at those words for a long time, because for the first time that morning, he wasn't writing a report about someone else. He was documenting the beginning of his own accountability. Several weeks passed. The incident never appeared on the evening news. No dramatic headlines. No viral videos. No public scandal. Most people who had walked past the federal building that morning eventually forgot what they had witnessed. Life had continued. Washington always moved on. But some moments refused to disappear. Officer Ethan Brooks carried one of them every day. The small notebook Captain Mitchell had given him remained inside the front pocket of his patrol bag. Its pages slowly filled. Not with traffic stops. Not with arrest statistics. But with reminders. Listen before deciding. Questions reveal more than assumptions. Authority earns trust through restraint. Simple sentences. Yet each one represented a lesson learned the difficult way. Months later, Ethan found himself responding to another parking complaint. A security guard insisted that a man sitting quietly inside a dark sedan looked suspicious. The description sounded painfully familiar. As Ethan approached, he noticed the driver calmly reading documents. The man lowered the window. Good afternoon, officer. This time, Ethan smiled first. Good afternoon, sir. No assumptions. No raised voice. Only conversation. Within minutes, the misunderstanding was resolved. The visitor was an attorney preparing for a federal hearing nearby. As the man drove away, Ethan caught himself smiling. Not because he had avoided embarrassment. Because he had chosen patience before judgment. Across the city, Marcus Reed never learned about that encounter. He never needed to. His work continued exactly as before. Protecting people whose names could never appear in public reports. Attending meetings that would never be announced. Serving missions that rarely received recognition. That had always been enough. One afternoon, Daniel Hayes walked beside Marcus through another secure government corridor. You know, Hayes said, most people would have filed a complaint. Marcus looked ahead. What would that have accomplished? Discipline. Marcus considered the question. The officer already received something more valuable. Hayes raised an eyebrow. What? A chance to become better. They continued walking. Neither man spoke again for several moments. Sometimes growth required consequences. Sometimes it required mercy. Wisdom was knowing which one served justice more completely. Far behind them, somewhere beyond the guarded buildings and quiet federal offices, Officer Ethan Brooks continued wearing the same badge. But not with the same mindset. He still enforced the law. He still wrote reports. He still stood between order and disorder every day. The difference was invisible, yet it shaped every decision he made. Because one calm stranger had taught him that dignity should never depend on appearance. And that truth deserved investigation before judgment. Imagine standing where Ethan once stood. Certain, confident, completely convinced you were right. Then imagine discovering that the person you underestimated had never asked for special treatment. Only fair treatment. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with flashing lights. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet opportunity to rethink what you believed. Marcus Reed never raised his voice. He never demanded respect. He simply carried the truth until everyone else caught up to it. Because in the end, the badge never made one person greater than another. Character did. He thought the law belonged to the one wearing the uniform. That morning, he discovered something far more powerful. The law belongs to those who honor it with humility. And justice has a remarkable way of revealing itself to anyone willing to see beyond their first assumption.